I don't think that there is anybody who better defines a generation of morally and intellectually bankrupt Americans better than Taylor Lorenz.
Embodiment of it.
And I don't mean that in terms of information. Like, I don't mean it in terms of like, oh, you know, people just don't follow the news. They don't actually think critically about things. They don't have access to education. So they're just like on iPads or whatever. It's the opposite. It's people like Taylor Lorenz who went to a Swiss boarding school or leftist beyond the map who try to interact in a public way to make themselves famous and then seem like they have some sort of a handle on information and facts.
Mm-hmm.
We will unleash the power of American innovation. We will soon be on the verge of finding the cures to cancer, Alzheimer's disease, and many other diseases.
The cure for cancer is closer than ever. But the Biden pill penalty is forcing researchers to abandon breakthroughs that could save millions of lives. Only President Trump can fix it. He'll ignite a golden age of innovation to defeat cancer once and for all. Tell Congress end the Biden pill penalty.
Ladies and gentlemen, your attention, please. Keep the faith, hold the line, and own the libs. It's time for our main event.
Mighty good Tuesday to you. Welcome back to the Ruthless Variety Program. A lot going on around here. Listen, fellas, you'll hate to hear it, but it turns out that our corporate media, our mainstream media, quote unquote, has still not gotten a sense of where the American people are on an awful lot of things.
You're kidding.
No, it's difficult. It's hard news to handle. We're coming off a Hack Madness
That's the
tournament.
thing. It's like we just had a tournament about how deranged these folks are, and they're like, not deranged enough. Not deranged enough.
I feel like every time we have Hack Madness, there's somebody who is upset that they weren't in a Final Four or an Elite Eight, so they make a real run. It's almost like to prove us like they belonged, and to our listeners that they should have been voted for. Because like the last week has really been something.
Yeah. And not to spoil it, but like I think in our episode where we discussed the championship and how Margaret Brennan, congratulations, Hack of the Year, how we were like notable, folks who had fallen off from being like dynasties or perennial contenders, and we're like, Taylor Lorenz, Now she's like,
didn't get involved.
Well, that's what
That's
what champions do. They see what Margaret Brennan accomplished this season, and they're like, I have to work my ass off if I want to get there. And clearly, it's what they're up to.
It's one thing to just totally misrepresent a Trump administration, and that's a day-to-day occurrence. We're sort of like accustomed to all of that. But much more pernicious is this like constant sort of validation of violence.
yep.
In society. We've seen it. We saw it during the Hamas protests on campus. We saw it during the George Floyd protests across the city, that somehow everybody else had to sit inside with a mask. But, when everybody's out burning down the cities, that was it was a right, a fundamental American right that, in fact, cured COVID, didn't it?
Apparently.
It was the burning of police stations.
Well, that's the thing is, the CDC said you can't catch COVID if you're rioting. That's like the one way to prevent any infection.
But remember what the left said in the lead up to this year, basically, is words are violence, but actual violence is not bad.
No. Right. I mean, it's a little bit of they had a little imbalance on that. But, hypocrisy be damned. Here we are. And we're going to go through a whole bunch of that. We got a great show, though.
Hell of a show.
We're going to get not only to two really conspicuous incidents of media, just trash media stuff that we'll get to on the front end. We're also going to talk some variety, and then we have an interview today that is fantastic. All of you know we're into sports. Fellas like sports. We watch sports. We used to play sports, although, I have my reservations about grown adults who have children playing competitive sports. I mean, you can play golf and you can play tennis, but like my view is that's it.
Well, it's tough. I mean, it's really tough to play competitive sports the way you did when you're a kid and not injure yourself. So you're walking into the office on a Monday with an ankle brace or knee brace, and everybody's like, what happened? And you're like, oh, no, I was playing basketball all day Saturday and all day Sunday. And you're like, well, what did your wife say about that?
Yeah. Well, but it also kind of like dovetails with this conversation that we've had about grown adults taking up like kids' parks and stuff like that, or like reserving time on baseball fields to play softball when you're 55 years old. Like, dude, give it up.
Yeah.
I understand. If that's what makes you tick, like, find something.
You know, one of the legends of radio, Jim Rome, used to have
softball guy.
Great bit on softball guys.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, totally. Also, I just wanted to say, Johnny and I last weekend were able to be a part of a golf tournament that went to a good cause. We were raising money for stuff, but we went down and participated with a bunch of good dudes in a golf tournament that I happened to win.
You took it down. You didn't tell me that.
Well, my team won, and they were named the Murder Donkeys.
Excellent. Excellent.
Yeah, they won.
That's terrific.
They beat my team, which was called the White House Press Corps.
At least the White House press corps took another L, right?
But you know what? It was close. We had the lead going into the last day, and they came away with it.
Good for you.
So it was neck
Good
and
stuff.
neck.
Yeah, well, he had a couple of sandbaggers from Furman University, which we hadn't met before. These guys are good dudes that graduated from Furman, like world-class humans, but both of them listed handicaps that were like 10 or so. And for those of you who aren't golf enthusiasts, it's kind of an average. You golf a lot, but it's like in the average of what golfers do who participate an awful lot. And both of these guys shot in like the low 70s consistently throughout, which leads me to believe, as somebody who was opposing their team, that there was a little bit of a handicap sandbagging involved, like maybe 10 plus strokes.
For sure.
There was no sandbagging.
But despite all of that, the Murder Donkeys overcame it and
Good stuff.
ultimately dealt Ashbrook's team a loss. And I'm happy about it. I'm proud of it. I feel very, I feel very good, and I'm glad that everybody else is on board with the Murder Donkeys. Listen, the NCAA commissioners are here. We had the opportunity to do something that we don't normally do, which is trot up to Capitol Hill as the commissioners of the SEC, the Big Ten, ACC, and the Big 12. These are like some of the most powerful people in all of sports. Went up to Capitol Hill to advocate for nil reform. They want a federal solution for name, image, and likeness. For those of you who are college sports fans, you know that this has sort of thrown a little bit of a wrench into things in terms of what you're accustomed to seeing on the field with your teams and whatnot. That and the transfer portal and all of it. They're up talking about it. And as a sports fan, like, this is something that you ought to pay attention to, because they rarely do you get people like this on Capitol Hill discussing in unison, because they're competitive with each other, right? But in unison, talking about how to reform collegiate sports in a meaningful way, and they need some federal help to do it. You've heard us talk to Tommy Tuberville, old ball coach, about a lot of that. We talked to Tom Crean, another old ball coach, about some of that. So it's an interest of ours, but for those of you who are sports fans, you're not going to want to miss that at the back end of here, because it's a good interview.
Yeah, it is, and it's such an important conversation, because this is an inflection point in college sports, and all of these states have different rules, and they need a federal standard. And Congress is not an easy place to get anything done, but they had a plan that they'll talk about later on in the show about how they think they can achieve a standard.
Other than Smug insisting that the ACC guy makes some moves against
UNC, Chapel Hill, they should be held accountable.
As an NC State guy, other than that, I thought it was a pretty productive conversation.
To be honest, it was just fascinating. I don't think you even need to be necessarily like a sports fan or college sports fan to get a lot out of it, because it is just extremely fascinating. It's rare that you get an issue brought before Congress from a group who isn't asking for like taxpayer money or anything. They're like, we just want to make sure we have a standard set of regulations for everyone to compete by and to protect students, and make sure everything is just taken care of without like 900 different jurisdictions. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, they're trying to protect the integrity, basically, of their respective conferences and how sports goes when it starts to look a little professional. And so it's a fascinating conversation. We also have Caitlyn Sutherland here from the Americans for Public Trust. She's somebody you've heard from a couple of times on the program already. We turn to her when we start looking into some of this like anti-corruption stuff that's going on. Her specialty and what they've done so well is rooting out foreign funding of political apparatus on the left-hand side.
Yeah, we've discussed this, the like left-wing dark money issue, specifically the international type, and like Elon's even started weighing in on this and becoming aware of this problem, because like Hans-Jörg Wyss, we've name-checked him a million times on the show, is a Swiss national who's pouring money into left-wing causes in America. It's not just George Soros. This has become like the thing for them to do, is just pump money into left-wing causes. Great to have someone who can fill in our audience on that.
Totally, and somebody who's doing something about it, which is terrific. Anyway, let's get into the main thrust of the program, and that is the incredible media takes that we've had about a couple of events that have happened here in the last week. The first one, you may have seen and read about the arsonist that took down the governor's mansion in Pennsylvania, where Governor Shapiro, Josh Shapiro, resides. Now, his name rings a bell, obviously, because he was on the short list for Kamala Harris as a VP. And hilariously, they didn't choose him. He was probably the most talented Democrat in the country at some, at least speaks to. I'm not saying that he is a moderate by any stretch of the imagination, because he's not. But he at least speaks to a center-left coalition in a way that, like, Tim Walz does not.
No, and he obviously has more talent than Tim Walz, but it's amazing to me how this guy tries to present up as moderate, and then if you look and see the things he does in the state of Pennsylvania, it's left, 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 left. It's like how most Democrats have gone in the last decade or so.
Yeah, well, anyway, apropos of not that, his poor situation there it was incredible. So the governor's mansion in Pennsylvania was attacked violently by a deranged individual who broke windows to get access to the governor's mansion and proceeded to set multiple fires that destroyed an unbelievable amount.
It was serious. Mm-hmm. This was not like just, some room burned or small. This was very like seeing photos from this. It was a very serious fire.
Yeah, it's incredibly serious. His family, his family were home at the time, which begs the question: how is it that this could ever happen? I mean, we are living in a world where there were 2 assassination attempts on Donald Trump's life in the last campaign. We have seen information flow be perverted in this country to a point where it's radicalized people beyond belief. And we think a huge culprit of that is this sort of traditional media that is providing a whole bunch of incentive structure for people to sort of excuse violent acts out of political concerns. You don't agree with somebody's politics, we'll treat that a little less significantly than we do if you agree with our politics.
Right.
Essentially.
No, that's exactly what they do.
And so what happened was that they ultimately made an arrest of the arsonist, a guy named Cody Balmer, who's accused of the firebombing of Governor Shapiro's home. If you can put up graphic 1, please. So this cat posted this thing on social media. It was shared from a radical leftist. What is it, girl? What is it?
The name
Riot
of this
Girls?
group is Riot Girls. That he was a part of their group, I guess, on Facebook, and that is what they are. For the folks who are just listening, it's like what are those needle points? I guess you call them.
The cross stitch.
Cross stitch.
There's your first sign.
Yeah, it's a Molotov that says "Be the light you want to see in the world," which is like the Molotov is essentially the universal symbol of left-wing politics at this point.
Like anarchist left.
Yep.
Right.
Type point of views, like the stuff that you saw on college campuses during their Hamas protests.
Right. As if you needed any more evidence that this guy was a lunatic because he's starting a fire to the governor's mansion in Pennsylvania. One look at that cross stitch and one piece of information that he's a part of something called Riot Girls. You know that he's touched.
Which is, it says, it's a quote, underground feminist punk movement. Okay.
So that guy's getting that thing in his feed.
Right.
So it gives
lunatic.
you a good indication of the mental health of this individual, as if the act itself was not a sign.
To go further, you need to be ready for what's down the road. As energy demand continues to rise, we're harnessing breakthrough innovations to increase production in the Gulf of America. Our latest deepwater development, Anchor, produces previously inaccessible oil and natural gas, allowing us to deliver the energy we all need today so everyone can follow their own road. That's energy in progress.
Well, anyway, he had shared at a couple of points multiple left-wing anti-capitalist posts on his Facebook page, according to the New York Post, and his home appears to have been foreclosed on last year, according to court documents. Ballmer appears to have expressed far-left beliefs on social media in recent years and attacked both Trump and Joe Biden. So this isn't like some sort of partisan leftist. This is like anarchist left stuff, which, as you see from like the Riot Girls or whatever.
But also,
that
it's
is.
like increasingly like this is like AOC's politics, you know?
Yep.
Like the whole like Joe Biden isn't left enough, and as you're seeing here, they're saying Shapiro's not left enough. Like the left has kind of built this problem of their own, of where they have radicalized and encouraged further and further left-wing views that this is what happens.
Well, and recall, I mean, there are two primary reasons why Governor Shapiro was not given the nod, in addition to what Democrats say, where they say, like, oh, she just didn't jibe with him.
Mm-hmm.
Like nonsense. The two primary issues that were obvious to anybody who was watching is, at the time, there's a huge constituency within the Democratic Party that didn't like the Jewish perspective,
That's right.
particularly as it pertained to Hamas.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a constituency within the Democratic Party that is large, and they don't want to admit it, but it's large, that just doesn't appreciate that. The second piece is that this is somebody who actually thinks at some level that a capitalist market-based economy is at least good for him to tax, which, you know, but it's the system that we have here. And he hasn't wholesale rejected the idea of a market-based economy, which, you know, for business owners and whatnot in Pennsylvania, is giving people at least some comfort that he's not trying to, like, socialize the entire free market of Pennsylvania, which, again, not good enough for the far left.
Ren, to your earlier point about how the mainstream media sort of encourages this or entertains it, on your first point about anti-Semitic movement inside the Democratic Party, remember the code that they used to use against Shapiro in the mainstream press is, oh, Kamala will have a Michigan problem. She won't be able to get all the votes she needs in Michigan. And why were they saying that? Because a bunch of
Because of Dearborn, Michigan.
Exactly. And so they were talking around it to try to protect this left-wing base so Democrats.
Yeah, it became a tactical discussion. Like, imagine you having a national. We covered this to like all lengths during the course of the campaign, but it was amazing how the media didn't cover this. Is the fact that there was a huge base constituency that Joe Biden had a problem with before they made the switch, that had everything to do like being pro-Hamas, which is a wild. I mean, they're literally in a terror organization that's been designated as such by the American government.
Right.
But there was a pro-Hamas constituency that showed up on all these college campuses across the country, and we saw them demonstrating, whatever. And the Democrats thought that that was so significant that it was the lead contributor to why it was that Joe Biden's poll numbers were lagging. It wasn't the fact that he couldn't put two sentences together.
They were fine with that. They knew that that's the base.
Yeah, it wasn't that he couldn't show up before 9 a.m. or after 5. It wasn't that he couldn't do more than 2 events a year or a day. It was why, like, the progressive left was reluctant to support him was this very issue. And so every time it came up, you're exactly right, Smash. They'd said, well, there's a Michigan problem with Josh Shapiro. Michigan problem means we have a huge constituency within the Democratic Party, predominantly in places like Dearborn, Michigan, that are just anti-Semitic.
Right. The media talks about them like it's seniors in Florida or soccer moms or something like that. And what does that lead to? I mean, we've got a whole host of clips from the media going nuts on this stuff.
Like it's just a demo to be dealt
Exactly.
with. I mean, imagine the inverse of this, like 10 or 12. And they try to do this to Donald Trump over the last 8 years too. But it's like the way media describes like white supremacists, as if it's part of a coalition that Republicans have ever courted.
Right.
Like, of course not.
Right.
Of course not. The difference is it is the same thing off the other side, but they treat it as though it's like it's a coalition that you need to build.
Right.
You know what I
That's
mean?
exactly
It's
right.
like, no, we understand that they actually wish death and associate themselves with a movement that thinks the existence
Right.
of Jewish people in the Israeli state is a problem.
They're just NASCAR dads.
No, I mean, it's true.
It is.
It's true, but that's the way this was talked about. Anyway, all of this is a precursor to where we're set with this nonsensical idiot taking this incredibly ridiculous action of lighting the governor's house on fire. Well, so how does NBC News cover it? Clip 1, please.
Bomber faces charges of attempted murder, terrorism, aggravated arson, and aggravated assault, according to court documents. Past social media posts from Bomber showing him critical of the Biden administration, writing in one post, Biden supporters shouldn't exist.
There it is. What are they? And this is the thing that they do, these bastards. They're trying to infer that, or they're trying to make the audience think, oh, wait, he was anti-Biden, which must mean he's a Trump guy.
Yeah, it's by omission.
And the thing is that they went through those. So this is very important. They went through the social media posts of this crazy guy, and the takeaway that they want the public to see is he was anti-Joe Biden. However, that image that we showed you earlier of like the Molotov and how it would belong to this radical feminist group, guess who also independently verified that? It was NBC News. So they know that this guy was a left-wing nut job, but they present it to the nightly news, to their audience as he was anti-Joe Biden, which wants you to think, oh,
it's a right-wing lunatic. Yeah. No, in fact, it's not the case. Wolf, do we have any other graphics or anything else about this guy's stuff? All right. Well, I mean, look, it goes on. Like he's a certifiable psychopath.
Clearly.
Yeah.
I mean, this is somebody who is a crazy person. His politics are basically just an anarchist, but he has associated himself with left-wing stuff, which has come at the Biden administration from a leftist position. And here you go, NBC News. Well, it's inferring by omission that somehow this is a Trump supporter.
Right.
I mean,
Great job, guys.
Come on. Listen, it's not to be outdone. In our next segment, you're not going to believe what we have seen here. It was on CNN by one of the favorites here in the Ruthless Variety Program, Taylor Lorenz, outright glorifying left-wing violence in a way that is like jarring. I mean, really jarring. We're going to get to it right after this.
Hardworking Americans know when it's time to roll up our sleeves and get the job done. Now is the time to unleash our nation's energy to create jobs, secure our future, and make life better, more affordable, and full of opportunity for all Americans. That's the power of America's oil and natural gas. Learn more at lightsonenergy.org. Paid for by the American Petroleum Institute.
Okay, so we're talking media bias. And we're talking about the way that the left, not just on a political shading and a presentation, as we've seen just horribly over the last, in none of this, they learn zero lessons. I mean, the politics be damned. The larger concern that we have here on the Ruthless Variety Program is the violent piece that they just subtly shade into justification. We covered that a little bit in segment 1, but wait until you see what we've got here. There was a CNN clip, Misinfo Nation, which in and of itself, like, think about that show, Misinfo. Do you think that that's about like COVID masks?
Right.
Do you think that? Do you have any? Right? I mean,
Do you
it's
think
just
that's about the experts who signed, a letter saying that Hunter Biden's laptop is Russian disinformation.
Yeah,
Is it about that?
Do you think that's what they cover?
They holding them accountable?
Something tells me that's not what it's about.
Yeah.
They're going to bring noted experts on disinfo, and not in the way that you think. People like Taylor Lorenz. This show is hosted by Donnie O'Sullivan. I don't know him from the Man on the Moon, but my understanding is that this is, he's not somebody who's on our team anyway. And wait till you see this clip. Clip 2, please.
These millionaire media pundits on TV clutching their pearls about someone standing a murderer when this is the United States of America, as if we don't lionize criminals, as if we don't have, we don't stand murderers of all sorts, and we give them Netflix shows. So you're going to see women especially that feel like, oh my God, right? Like, here's this man who's revolutionary, who's famous, who's handsome, who's young, who's smart. He's a person that seems this morally good man, which is hard to find.
Yeah, I just realized women will literally date an assassin before they swipe right on me. That's where we are.
And they're
it's so funny.
For context, they're talking about Luigi, the murderer.
Yeah.
So this is, it's mind-blowing to see. This is on CNN, folks. This is on CNN. They're having a fun little conversation where Taylor Lorenz is like, so you've got this handsome, intelligent, what did she describe him as? Morally righteous individual? We're talking about Luigi, the guy who murders people in broad daylight.
So this is the first time I've seen this clip, and the other thing that caught my attention was how she led into it by saying, this is the United States of America. We talk about criminals as if that's good. And it's just like, are you kidding me, lady? This guy, he murdered a guy in cold blood. The guy was from Iowa. Maybe you don't like his company, but he shot the guy in the back.
We had small kids, small children.
It's the most fucking cowardly thing that anybody has done on national television in a very, very long time. And she's saying that he's a hero. It's outrageous, dude.
It's so insane and also hypocritical. You can talk about how she's like, these millionaire media pundits. Folks, Taylor Lorenz attended a $60,000 a year Swiss boarding school. When she's trying to talk about the rich in this country, it's time to hold them accountable. I agree. Her, number one. But to give airtime to someone to be like, here's the thing, and for her to be the expert that's brought on to the show Misinfonation, right? And her opinion's like, in America, we give shows to serial killers on Netflix. It's like, you may have missed the memo. The purpose of the show isn't glorifying them. It's to be like, this crazy serial killer. Look, it's like, you think this, if you watch The Silence of the Lambs, you're like, wow, serial killers are glorious. You really, there's a lot of issues for you right there at that point.
Yeah. True crime isn't about identifying with the mass murderer.
You're not supposed to listen to a true crime podcast and be like, wow, this is cool. I like this guy.
It's such a good point. It's like you missed the whole point of true crime genre. It's like everyone who's listening is thinking to themselves like, could I miss the telltale signs of a psychopath?
Right.
Could this kind of thing happen in my society? I can't possibly identify with such a maniac. She's like, no, that's who we are.
Yeah.
We love them.
Yeah.
We love the people who kill all of these people. I don't think that there is anybody, let's get to CNN in a second. I don't think that there is anybody who better defines a generation of morally and intellectually bankrupt Americans better than Taylor Lorenz.
Embodiment of
it. And I don't mean that in terms of information. I don't mean it in terms of people just don't follow the news. They don't actually think critically about things. They don't have access to education. So they're just on iPads or whatever. It's the opposite. It's people like Taylor Lorenz who went to a Swiss boarding school or leftist beyond the map who try to interact in a public way to make themselves famous and then seem like they have some sort of a handle on information and facts in society. And then they go out and say shit like that.
Yep.
And the idea that the United States at any point is comfortable with assassinating a young CEO who's a father of young children in broad daylight because he's hot and he is fun. And then she goes on to say that he's, essentially morally good.
Yeah. She said, a morally righteous guy.
The whole idea behind it, I think, is in and of itself this pervasive piece of new media culture that we got to get a handle on, because if you took our first story, that's a cat who is insane.
Yep.
Clearly had mental health issues, or he wouldn't do shit like that. But also struggling in life, probably like disconnected from a larger society, and was interacting with people who provide credibility for insanity. This is someone who has worked at the New York Times, the Washington Post, recently left the Washington Post because they thought they had larger economic opportunities doing their own thing and distributing all of that amongst the this poison amongst the American people, and then showing up as a guest to speak with authority about how the American people view an assassin of a father of young children. I mean, this is, how do you give air to shit like this?
Well, I think it shows you everything that you were just talking about. I think it also shows you the disconnect between the elites in this country and regular people out there in the Midwest who are trying to make a living. Even if you're a Democrat in the Midwest, even if you voted for Joe Biden, even if you're like, I kind of like what Bernie Sanders thinks. Under no circumstances are you like, yeah, it was a good idea that guy shot the guy in the back. No circumstances.
Here's where I disagree.
Somebody like Taylor Lorenz is so rich and so out of touch with normal people that she thinks everybody is just someone to be manipulated. We just do a Netflix show. We manipulate them. We get them the way we want them to vote for Democrats and the most liberal thing available. I'm telling you that normal people listen to that and they're like, turn it off.
But here's the thing is, yet. I say yet in the sense of, I think there's a huge reason why we had the first story lead into this story, which is like, you see this left-wing nut job go and try to burn down the house where Shapiro and his family are. You see right there Taylor Lorenz being like, this guy who killed a CEO is morally good. It's all kind of, and that the media specifically in that first story didn't identify, oh, this guy's a left-wing lunatic. They imply that he's a Trump supporter. They're trying to push the left-wing public further and further left, closer to radicalization. You see, like, it's almost like, cause and effect. Right there, in front of your eyes, you see NBC News presenting this information of, wow, we don't know how this guy just, decided to do this crazy attack. No idea. And then you see on CNN, they're like, Taylor Lorenz, tell us why it's cool to shoot people.
What could that possibly accomplish but to incentivize a certifiably crazy person that there is fame and glory in a life that is otherwise completely devoid of it, right? I mean, this is a guy in Louisiana. He grew up in a privileged background, went to school, and was like, at elements in his life, like relatively well-adjusted, had some kind of what appears to be a mental health breakdown, went off the left-hand side of the map and decided to murder in cold blood a father of a young family who ran a healthcare company of which he knows very little about other than he thinks they're evil, right? And like, I just don't understand how giving voice to that at any level provides important context to the American people that this is news and information you can use.
No, dude, it's such a good point. And you think about major media organizations like the Associated Press. They take it upon themselves. We're not going to call it Gulf of America. We're going to call it Gulf of Mexico. We're not going to name these certain criminals. We're going to do it our own way. Yet, when it comes to this guy, his name is in there. His cause is in there. Every little detail that supports the left-wing agenda is exactly what they're pushing. And I'm telling you, the media is responsible for so much more ill in our society than they would ever admit to.
And it just persists. It's just, it's one thing when we talk about it every day about political framing. It's another when you're talking about actual violence. Not to be outdone, the third story, CBS. So on 60 Minutes, they did this thing, which we found absolutely hilarious at some level. CBS is talking about Mayan culture, right? And they're trying to explain historically what certain things in the Mayan area and the Mayans did, and like how are all these things. Can we put up graphic 2, please? we see how the issue of sacrifice exists in both cultures. It was a practice. It's not that they were violent. It was their way of connecting with the celestial bodies. What they're talking about here in that quote was that they found the ruins of an altar that was used for human sacrifice.
Child sacrifice specifically.
And children specifically.
Yeah.
And their idea of like cultural tolerance at some level is so predominant that they have now green flagged child sacrifice because we don't understand what it was that they were trying to express.
So they're kind of like bringing back the Ralph Northam playbook where they were like, well, listen, the child was provided comfort. It wasn't violent. It was just sacrificing the child after it was born, right? This was an altar used for child sacrifice that CBS News is like, experts say it wasn't violent. Just got to kill the kid and throw him down a pyramid. It's a, normal thing.
They're like, here's the facts. It was an altar, and they did sacrifice, and it was of children. But that was a way of connecting to their larger culture and their gods and all of that kind of thing. So,
did they get an expert in archaeology or just like someone from Planned Parenthood to be like, you know what? Sometimes it's just child sacrifice, folks.
It's insane. It's insane, and it shows you why CBS was overrepresented in this year's Hack Madness tournament.
It's insanity.
But again, it goes just to wrap this segment up before we get into our question of the day. It's this moral relativism.
Yep.
It's this bankruptcy of intellectual understanding, this cultural embrace that we all used to have in the United States about our value set. That you can somehow try to make the attack on Governor Shapiro's governor's mansion a partisan issue and shade by omission who is responsible for it when you know damn well, because you're the organization that uncovered it, that this was a crazy person who was probably a left-wing anarchist, if anything. It's the kind of thing that you do by putting somebody like Taylor Lorenz on the air who can justify and glorify an assassin of a father of young children. It's the kind of thing that you can do when you look at ancient cultures and you're like, yeah, they were pretty good. The child sacrifice is not, you had to be there.
Yeah.
It basically had to be there. You know?
Yeah.
Like, if you're doing that stuff consistently, it is much more pervasive and much more dangerous culturally than just simply framing a political argument in a negative way. Like, this thing has gotten really off the rails.
Out of hand.
It has gotten. So our question of the day is, how much of political violence do you think? And we've seen everything from shootings to
attempted assassinations of President Trump,
to Tesla car attacks, to all of these things that, by the way, there were far fewer incidents that were associated in years past that they made the number one terror threat. Remember the Biden administration? The number one terror threat was domestic, and it was right-wing white men. Remember? They just said that. They just straight up said that. Far fewer incidents, fewer and further between, harder to connect than what it is that we're talking about in the course of 6 days. Right? And yet, this is all just sort of information, news you can use.
Incredible.
So our question of the day for all of you is, how much does the media bear responsibility for self-radicalizing these crazy people into left-wing attacks that they at some point think are justified because they're not commonly condemned in the same way that all violence should be? Right? I mean, it's a good question.
Great question.
It's a good question. When we come back, we're going to get to your comments from last episode. Who in the new media should we have on Ruthless? Remember, we're like the band. We like to party with everybody. We bring everybody in. Natalie Winters, great big hit.
Yeah.
And fellow podcaster Ted Cruz last week.
Yeah.
So
It was the new media episode.
People loved it.
all of that coming up right after this.
You might not see it on your receipt, but there's a hidden tax driving up the cost of everything, from your car insurance to your hospital bill. It's lawsuit abuse. Frivolous lawsuits are costing every American family over $4,000 a year, and it's getting worse. Trial lawyers are suing Medicare, suing small businesses, even suing President Trump. Not for justice, but for profit. And guess what? The billions they rake in get funneled back to the politicians who protect their rigged system. President Trump has a plan to stop them. His loser pays reform would make the people who file junk lawsuits pay the price, not taxpayers like you. Experts say the president's plan could save us over $2 trillion. It's time to end the lawsuit abuse. It's time to make America affordable again. Go to moreaffordableusa.com. Paid for by Make America Affordable Again.
Okay, so our question of the day on last Thursday, after we had a big new media day of interviews that we had. By the way, check that episode out. It was pretty solid.
It's a great one.
Yeah.
Pretty solid. But our question is, like, who else in the new, like, who else on the conservative side would you like to hear sit with the fellas and play a set, essentially? Your comments, remember, you got to like and subscribe in order for us to read them. But when you do, we read all of them, and we pick a few that we think are particularly interesting. And to do that, we always start with a voice.
Okay, first one comes from Bright Hawk. And Bright Hawk writes, at 68, I'm sliding down the far side of the hill of your listener demo, but people that I hear on podcasts that I think would be good on your show are Mary Catherine Ham. You can't have her on enough.
I love that.
Yeah, Guy Benson, Dwayne Patterson, Generalissimo, the longtime producer of the Hugh Hewitt Show. Love that guy. Jim Garrity, James Lilacs, Haviv Gur, Vic Mattis, Matt Continetti, Ed Morrissey, former Congressman John Campbell, Kurt Schlichter. You can't have him enough. Bethany Mandel, Selena Zito, Byron York, just to name a few. Do any of them qualify as new media? I don't know, but there you go.
It's so cool. You know what? What's so cool about that is...
I agree with all those, by the way.
I totally agree. But it's also very cool in many of our listeners, you know, you try to gather information from a number of places. And when you see this sort of list of people that, you know, we know very well, many of whom have been on the program before, you understand how people are just self-educating themselves on really smart people that produce really smart things. All good suggestions. We will get to all of them. Great stuff. Smuggles, what do we got for two?
This one comes from Mel Varama. They write, next interview, Mike Rowe on the new listener view, Hugh Hewitt. Thank you so much for that. Old enough to have been laughing for the first 20 minutes. Proud of my senator, Ted Cruz, the best.
Oh, that's awesome.
So good.
Which, by the way, did you see the Hugh just signed with Fox?
Excellent.
You know, I did not see
Great
that.
pickup.
That is awesome.
Just signed a deal with Fox.
Yeah.
Very, very good for both our good friends over at Fox and for Hugh Hewitt, who we think is one of the most intellectually gifted.
Oh, yeah.
He's awesome.
Of any conservative. I mean, you're talking about 10 of 10 type analysis. He's so good. Perfect fit over there. That is just an awesome deal.
And do you guys know where he's from?
Oh,
you
boy,
guys know where
you're
he's
going to
from?
do this? It's an Ohio thing. You had to do
He
that?
happens to be from Ohio.
Of course.
Yeah, but he's a Browns fan.
That's okay. We come together under certain circumstances.
Oh, it's really good. All right, so we got to get to some Friday. Would you like to do some Friday?
I love it. I love it.
Smuggles, you picked one
Yes.
that I thought was particularly interesting. I'd like to get your framing on it because I don't know where this is going.
Yeah.
Go right ahead.
So this story it says, mother arrested and held in cell for, quote, confiscating child's iPad. It says here, history teacher Vanessa Brown, 50, spent 7.5 hours in a custody cell on March 26th this year following a claim she had, quote, stolen 2 iPads, which were traced to her mother's house in Surrey, yet it transpired that the 2 devices belonged to her daughters, and Miss Brown had merely confiscated them to encourage them to focus on their schoolwork. A fact Surrey police now acknowledge. She says, quote, I find it quite traumatic, and even talking about this now, at no point did they, meaning the officers, think to themselves, oh, this is a little bit of an overreaction for a moment, confiscating temporarily her iPads, popping over to her mom's to have a coffee. Just a complete overreaction. That's her take on it.
So this is IBC, an outfit in the UK that has apparently come across a story where a mom was arrested for taking iPads away from her children.
Yep.
That's
Now-
legit the
now,
way this thing went down?
some-
That is what happened.
Some people might say that is a little too harsh by the authorities. But Smug, you have been very clear that there's too much iPad involvement.
That kind of, you get my take on this, is they should keep her locked up. Lock her. Keep her locked up. You give your kids iPads, what do you think's going to happen? You know? All of society has had to start dealing with the kids that you've raised via iPad, right? Like nowadays, you see a kid flipping out, whether it's in a restaurant, whether it's on a plane. What is the solution parents always attempt now? They'll either hand them an iPad, or the kid's already got an iPad and they're like, I don't know what to do. I'm out of ideas. I tried everything. I gave the kid an iPad.
So you're saying because she initially gave them iPads,
Yep.
not that she attempted to take them away, is a jailable offense.
Well, here's the thing is you made the monster and now you're like, oh, wow, how could this happen to me? Lock them up. Lock them up.
Do you ever feel like it's almost like an SNL like 90s skit on Weekend Update when we deal with these kind of things? You like sit back and you're like, and now for your take. And he's like, the conservative case for drowning a puppy in an airport.
But I mean, this is so central to so many issues that we have today.
Central.
Of parents have completely outsourced their responsibility for almost a generation now at this point to the iPad, where they're like, hand a kid an iPad, that'll solve the problem. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to make a kid stop flipping out. I don't know how to keep a kid occupied. The child's brain is now used to just like flashing lights and going ham while they hold this iPad. They demand to be like fully stimulated and going crazy at all times. So like the child's growing up thinking the purpose of my parent is to ensure I am entertained the entire time I'm awake.
Do you have any problem with the fact that the cops' initial reaction to all of this was on the children's side?
I'm fine with that. By any means necessary, punish iPad parents. I don't care what the offense is. Lock them up. Lock them up. Make parents terrified of giving their kids iPads. And then you know what happens? All of a sudden society starts healing.
Oh, it's quite a take. It's quite a take.
Did you know Original Medicare loses billions of taxpayer dollars each year to waste, fraud, and abuse? In fact, improper payments to hospitals and doctors are twice as likely in Original Medicare than in Medicare Advantage. Alternatively, Medicare Advantage offers seniors more benefits at lower costs, promotes better health outcomes, and saves taxpayers $144 billion over 10 years through coordinated care. It's time to protect Medicare Advantage and ensure seniors get the best care while protecting your hard-earned tax dollars.
We wanted to lead into our conversation with the commissioners of the SEC, the Big Ten, the Big 12, and the ACC, most powerful commissioners in all of collegiate athletics, with a little like precursor for why it is that all these people are up here. You may have read about a Tennessee quarterback lately. Guy's a star, been a huge star last year, propelled Tennessee to the top of the national discussion, nearly made the college football playoff. In fact, they did make the college football playoff in the expanded field. They weren't at the top, but someone that they felt like they were building the team around. And the reports are that this guy was basically offered a couple of $1 million nil contract, and he wanted to renegotiate after a good season, which essentially means that collegiate athletics is a annual free agency for all of these people. The guy makes a commitment. As you will hear, the kind of dollars that are allocated for somebody just in terms of their education, their housing, their medical attention, all of those things, hundreds of thousands of dollars by a university making a commitment to a kid like this, but he has a good season, he wants to get back in it. He wants to find a different value. Not going to an outside corporate entity to see if name, image, and likeness are something that can get him paid more, which is the Supreme Court decision that has rendered this conversation relevant to collegiate athletics. When they do that, what the Supreme Court was talking about essentially was ensuring that kids who sell jerseys, kids who have like a shoe contract, kids who corporations want to put in ads can be compensated for their name, their image, and likeness. Now that has been perverted. And all of these programs basically tried to figure out how to supplement any money that you could get on an open market for marketing a successful player with some kind of an income that would attract them to come to their school over somebody else's school. And you've seen a bunch of different states kind of like try to come up with their own incentives for people donating to these collectives that ultimately pay these players. And it's becoming a real conundrum. Like basically, if you're a fan of most colleges and university sports, you've seen players that have been household names all of a sudden end up playing for a rival over the next year because someone paid them more or they have this transfer portal you can get out and they can, essentially get more from the school. Well, these guys are all concerned about this. And they think that there is a real problem in terms of, perverting the original intent of name, image, and likeness compensation, and ensuring that there's a standard across their conferences where all teams are basically playing at the same competition level. Mm-hmm. You're not creating state legislation that incentivizes, North Carolina over South Carolina or Florida over Alabama or vice versa. And so they took the really unprecedented action of sitting down with us for a long-form conversation about all of this stuff. I found it completely fascinating, fellas.
Mm-hmm. Me too.
It was amazing.
Also fascinating to me that conference chairmen at this point are like Fortune 50 CEOs.
That's right.
I mean, in and of themselves, if the guy showed up and they were running like Apple, you wouldn't be blown away by that.
Not at all.
You know what I mean?
So, like so much talent.
It's got a resume that seems like they would belong, like they can run huge. And it just shows you the power structure and how that's changed. These are all television contracts. They own the enforcement within collegiate athletics now in a way that the NCAA always used to do. Now, they were careful not to like imply that or shade on the NCAA. But the fact that they were there, the four of them together who inherently compete not just for titles and whatever, but actual schools to go as realignment has happened over the last few years is a pretty, it's a pretty incredible thing. Anyway, take a look. You don't see the fellas on Capitol Hill every day, so when we are, you got some very special guests. These guys are the specialist of special guests, the commissioners of the four largest athletic conferences in college athletics. Welcome, Jim Phillips of the ACC. Listen, Big Ten guy. We've got some Big Ten guys. Tony Petitti, welcome. Thank you. Brett Yormark, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been fun to chat. And Greg Sankey, SEC. We see you everywhere. The SEC is...
It just means more. I take that as a win right there.
He's got the tagline down.
Well, listen, gentlemen, anytime we get the four of you in one room agreeing on something, it must be a big deal. I know you all work well together. Typically, conferences, you have a competitive nature, but you're all up on Capitol Hill. What's this all about?
Well, there's 500,000 student athletes that are depending on us now and in the future. And I think to maybe level set this a little bit, besides the GI Bill, no other group has benefited more from scholarships and support than student athletes have. Access and affordability to higher education has meant a lot to these young men and women. And as you look at the life of a student athlete for all of us, it's about making sure we continue to create and modernize their experiences, provide benefits for them to excel, and make sure that they have a voice relative to where we're going. And among many things that we're trying to get accomplished, one of the main things is to try to get some federal help on some legislation that will really help us sustain and excel this enterprise that means a lot.
Yeah, and so this is all basically downstream of nil decision. You've had a whole bunch of developments in this space where student athletes compensated for name, image, and likeness. Seems like a evolving topic in the sort of infancy of this whole deal. Your job, obviously, is to preside over the health and well-being of not only your conferences, but your student athletes. It's changing pretty quick. And this is for everybody.
Yeah, look, I think the settlement that we hope will be approved shortly allows us to use a word that Jim just said, modernize what we're doing. I think a few years ago, I'm relatively new to the space, 2 years in, the idea of direct revenue sharing with student athletes was probably something that wouldn't have been thought of. The NIL stuff is still relatively new, as you pointed out. So all of that's happening. I think the help we need here is to allow us to take a system that we know is better for student athletes, everybody's committed to it, and try to get some protection to actually operate it and go across. And I think one thing people have to also remember is that we do compete across, and so we need rules for everybody. What's good for Ohio State has to be good for Carolina, and we show up in these national championships. The roster is how you build them, how you compete for players, because we compete for student athletes, we compete on the field. You need some system of rules that makes sense, that's the same. And states are motivated to provide competitive advantages, and that's just a whole nother, problem we've been dealing with the last few years. Like we've got to get some sort of stability to actually operate something that we know is going to be better for student athletes.
So I think that's the big picture idea here, is that this is such a new, it's like a new frontier of name, image, likeness for student athletes, that basically you're trying to establish a universal set of rules that protects all the athletes, make sure everyone's taken care of, and everyone has a level playing field. Is that the general idea here?
I think that at the end of the day, it's stability for our schools and our student athletes, and putting some parameters around what you're seeing out there today. As Tony said, I've been here relatively a short period of time as well, came from professional sports. The one thing about professional sports is that you have teams in every market, but they're governed by the same rules. And we don't have that right now.
Yeah, so just tell me about that. A bunch of states doing different things. They affect
34 different states interpret NIL differently.
Wow.
So one of the things that we're looking for on our trip here is, how do we get federal preemption of some of those state laws? So there's uniformity and standardization across the ecosystem. So there's an even playing field, if you will, for all of our schools. Listen, we want to compete, but we want to compete fairly.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And one of the interesting components of this, when you mentioned 34 different states, 34 different rules, you're very clearly not governing what people can be paid and when they can be paid. You want the same set of rules that each school can operate under, Craig? Is that sort of?
Yeah, the simple way to think about it is, what do our student athletes deserve? We boil it down to the essential element of the participant. And so a young person, having just left the Final Four, wants to know at tip-off, the people in the other uniform are held to the same standards that they're being held to at the current time. When you're lining up across from the line of scrimmage in a football game, same thing. And this is what young people tell us all the time. I want to know that my competitors are held to the same standards. And if we're going to do this on a state-by-state basis, if you bring to the logical conclusion the notion that each state has its own rules, we don't have national championships. We essentially have high school type championships at the college level. And the ability to have a college football playoff, a Final Four, a College World Series is predicated on national standards. So when you start to think through the change that's happened, it's around name, image, and likeness and economic activity. It's gone further into seasons of eligibility, how eligibility is defined, how long you can stay on the field, which then impacts high school entry points. It actually limits those, since experience and expertise are valued along with maturity. An older player is seen as having an important place on a roster over an 18 or 19-year-old. So to combine those together, and we're seeing the erosion of opportunity. While on one hand, there are new economic opportunities, those are now, because of court decisions, being extended to those already in the cohort, already participating. And so how do those new opportunities come in? You take all of that, our student athletes deserve better than this patchwork of state laws. They deserve better to than not having any real consumer protection. People who are agents or presenting contracts, there's no oversight.
Right.
From an educational perspective, okay, it's great that people can transfer. What are the outcome-based issues that we're going to see down the road, where we have seen inherent educational value around college athletics? And young people, student athletes, as they've commonly been described, are asking for something that's much more consistent in the environment. They like the benefits that have been provided by schools and the economic opportunities, but they question the fundamental equity around this being driven based on state borders.
Duncan?
How do you think, in your perfect world, if you got federal legislation that unified all the rules across all the states, how would that impact the current system of outside donor-led collectives that are helping raise money for these NIL deals?
Student athletes in the new model are going to have multiple abilities to earn. They'll participate in rev share, right? And each institution will decide how much it wants to spend on what athletes, on what sports, how they want to support it. So those are local decisions. I think you'll see some consistency across schools in that area. The second thing is student athletes can pursue their own NIL rights. And those can come from third-party deals. It can come from the fact that people are associated with the university. But at the end of the day, we've got to really understand what NIL is. We've called a lot of things NIL that haven't been NIL. Let's just really be honest about that.
Agreed.
And so we've got to get to the point where NIL really is that, where a student athlete, either locally, regionally, or nationally in some cases, if you've been watching the the tournament the last few weeks, you've seen those athletes that are in those national commercials. It's not a lot of them, but there are some.
Yeah.
And so they absolutely be able to pursue those rights. Where it gets really tricky is when you have related parties, and that doesn't exist in the pro model. The pro model doesn't have, fans who are trying to get professional athletes more money. And so we've got to be respectful. These are people that support our universities. They're great supporters of everything that happens on campus, but we've got to make NIL be NIL. And so what we're trying to build is a way to look at deals and say, is that a fair market deal? Is that really for the student athletes' NIL rights, the work they're doing on behalf of a company or a business or a product? Is that fair? Yeah. And we need that system so that we don't end up in a system where money's flowing to student athletes, and it's a way to get around the rev share and all the things we're trying to build. And that gets right back to what Greg was talking about, then competitive balance and everything else gets thrown out again. So we've just got to make NIL be NIL, and that's a great thing for student athletes. There's lots of opportunities. And then the last piece that people forget, they're still getting the value of the educational benefits on top of that.
Yeah.
Right? So you get the chance to have rev share, you get the chance to earn NIL based on your own performance, where you are, how good you are, how much people know you, your social media following, and you get this tremendous thing, which is your scholarship, cost
They're
of
not giving that away.
all of those things. And those are the three big buckets. It's pretty powerful.
It is, and one of the things that we've just forgotten about, which needs to be mentioned, is we've had such great advancements to the experiences of our student athletes. When you talk about guaranteed scholarships, and then as they conclude eligibility, a chance for them to go back to school, right? While they're with you, medical care, dental care, eye care, right? Sports nutrition, sports psychology, equipment, unlimited meals, all of those types of things have gone from one a day meals, or as a bagel, a snack, or a meal, depending on when you serve it. I mean, that's where this thing started 15 or 20 years ago. And the student athletes have benefited from that, their experiences. This is the next iteration, and this is that modernization of compensating student athletes. And we all saw with Judge Wilkins' kind of initial reaction on Monday about feeling pretty good about the settlement piece of it. And I think for all of us, we all believe student athletes should be compensated beyond the scholarship and the benefits they get. But don't underestimate, we all have our numbers. A kid in the ACC is averaging about $277,000 worth of benefits, even prior to
before a nil deal.
That's incredible.
So that's part of kind of what we feel that this idea of absolutely this idea of access and affordability to higher ed. Not only is it affordable and student athletes are getting access, but they're also able to now take care of themselves and their families.
Yeah, but you guys are all up here on Capitol Hill, a very notoriously difficult place to get anything done. And this is a pressing problem, and I'm just wondering what would happen if Congress isn't able to accomplish a national standard.
I can just say one thing. Again, being relatively new in this space, the common denominator on the Hill is everyone's had a great college experience. They know the benefits of collegiate athletics. They know it's at the center of the entire ecosystem. It drives everything for these institutions. So I think there's a huge appetite to try to get something done, and I'm very encouraged by it. I think from our perspective, we just have to build consensus. And it's going to be give and take. It'll be a compromise. But I firmly believe we're going to get there.
If you go back to the question of what if there isn't action, which is a potential. This is 6 years of visits for me. I think we've educated and informed well, but there's a divide, and that's not a secret. Like, I didn't just break news. Let me just scroll that one. And those divides will are over, kind of clear and consistent issues.
Well, that's I was going to ask about that.
Oversight, employment, contractual protections, kind of guarantees of benefits, which that last one we're happy to provide. But let me just quickly, so what do we need? We need preemption of the state laws, return to a national standard. Like, that's a reasonable ask. The second is, to Tony's point earlier, let's define what name, image, and likeness activity actually represents. That's done through the proposed settlement, whether it's approved or not. At least there's a structure that's offered. And by the way, if you go to look at like the NBA and NFL with hundreds of players, there are few, relatively speaking, with meaningful national quote, name, image, and likeness deals, right? Then you go to the third piece and say, well, there's some skepticism about trusting athletic programs with providing the kind of support. Now, first of all, it's competitive, so people are incentivized to provide great nutritional support, medical care, concierge mental wellness care, the benefits that Jim just spoke of. So we'll include that. Student athletes in high numbers say, I don't want to be employees, because when you look at the benefits provided that aren't subject to taxation, for one, that would be a significant change in many of their lives who won't have this name, image, and likeness benefit. So we need to be careful about kind of blanket descriptions. If things don't happen, so if it just stays as it is, that means we're going to legislate at the state level, and we'll have, Brett said 34, it's going to be 50 different approaches eventually. And it will be a race to eliminate any oversight or regulation. How do you have national competition? How does the Big 12 and the SEC have non-conference games? How do you come together for national championships? There's a consistent vision that's uniquely American. This doesn't exist anyplace else. That's why it's a bit harder for us to work through. So let's put away some of the old labels about exploitation, lack of support, people being dismissed for an injury. Those aren't the realities today. But the threat is, if it's simply ungoverned and unregulated, and the NCAA can't do that, some of the state legislation would prevent conferences from adopting common sense oversight, then what we're left with is anything goes. And some of the behavior now would suggest that's what some campuses prefer. But the idea of mutuality that has worked really well needs to be front and center, because simply acting independently doesn't facilitate this great American tradition that we need to protect. And that's part of our responsibility, that's part of the ask. And so the threat goes right to that tradition. Can it function in a fully unregulated marketplace, if you will, particularly when we've seen what maybe overregulation means by a private entity, lawsuit after lawsuit, and then we've seen the frustration and the competitive interests that relate to legislation after legislation at the state level. And I hope that people hear the message that, sure, we're going to have economic activity. We need institutions agree to follow the rules. We've lost that. And we need a set of national standards that can be understood, overseen, and then accountability when someone steps outside the boundary lines.
What I'm hearing from all of you, and this isn't interesting from just a fan's perspective, and the great critique of the modern era of nil and transfer portals is that you get into this have and have not construct that you are talking about, Greg, and that there are some conferences and some teams, obviously with larger fan bases, that have more enthusiasm, more recent success, maybe a shoe store that happens to be in their backyard, those kind of things that help sort of add to one institution. That I think what I'm hearing from you is, without a consistent set of rules that everybody has to live under, it's going to get a lot worse.
Well, think about the differences between pro and college sports, and I think there are many. I think we're a poor replacement for what the NBA and NFL does. It's different, but let's not reduce this to just some full-on minor league reality. Despite the labels that are provided, there is something different. Our campuses don't move. They're not sold. There aren't different owners. We also, in my league, have responsibility for 22 championships.
Was that a humble brag?
The NFL has one. The NFL has one. Major League Baseball has one sport to deal with. I think we all take that responsibility seriously. And within that inventory for us of 22, and it goes up into the 30s for some of my colleagues, is embedded our Olympic development and our Olympic support program.
Right.
And if the pressure is just to win in those revenue-producing
sports,
entities and then invest all of the money around that talent acquisition, the elimination of 22 down to something else is real.
That's a really good point.
It's real. And when you alter greatly, which we're doing now, but we're trying to do it with boundaries, the economics of college sports, you alter in a very significant way the Olympic development and Olympic support program in this country. And that has even bigger implications beyond our campuses and our conversation today to the geopolitical atmosphere. these are our realities that make this an incredibly complex situation with the external pressures, our sports responsibilities, the educational expectations, and the lifelong impacts that exist when you move a young person from adolescence to adulthood on a college campus through college athletics.
Yeah, Jim.
We all see what the CFP does. We just came off the NCAA basketball championship. Congratulations to Greg down there on Florida. But
I hugged him.
I was just going to say.
That was his first text. It's all good.
But there's nearly 200,000 student athletes at the Division I level, right? 85% of those teams and 75% of those student athletes aren't in the sports of football and basketball. Right?
Yeah.
They're part of that Olympic development program, and we're all really proud of what our campuses and our conferences do as far as being a pipeline to the Olympic team. We can't lose that. We can't lose that because we don't have our house in order. We don't have federal legislation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I think we're all optimistic on both sides of the aisle, and you guys cover it very well. And there's some really distinct differences where they're not going to come together. It'll be very difficult to that. We feel like we've gotten some very good traction, that you when you look at this reasonably and you look at, again, 500,000 young men and women are depending on this, it's important for them to come together, and that's what our hope is today.
It's interesting. I mean, we're also talking about just, you all made reference to defining name, image, and likeness as it is defined, of being compensated for your name, image, and likeness, that we got a decision from the Supreme Court on. Clearly, initially, when this sort of opened the floodgates, there was a rush from every competitive school to try to create a marketplace, basically, where athletes weren't initially, I mean, some, maybe few, but as you mentioned, even in the NBA, not name, image, and likeness contracts aren't everywhere. But there was a rush to create a local marketplace, basically, for compensation for recruits, for all that kind of thing. Going to happen in any sort of competitive marketplace, let alone sports, which is immensely popular across the country. Is it your view that what you're trying to accomplish here at some level is, A, protect the student athlete, but B, also get back to that sort of marketplace and not have a rush to sort of create a who's got the biggest boosters?
Candidly, it was an artificial marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
It was pay for play. Let's call it what it is. Mm-hmm. And I think in this new age of collegiate athletics and this moving forward through settlement, we got to put some parameters around that.
Yeah.
Tony spoke about it momentarily ago. Good commercial NIL. Big brands elevating and amplifying and glamorizing our student athletes.
Mm-hmm.
We advocate for that.
Yep.
And moving forward, we'd love to see more of it.
Yeah.
But it has to meet the guardrails that we're going to put in place to avoid this artificial marketplace, which was pay for play.
Yeah, because it's interesting, right? I mean, if you take some of the highest grossing nil athletes in a traditional marketplace aren't in the power, the major revenue sport. I mean, Livy Dunn, LSU, for example, perfect example. The Nebraska volleyball team, another example. I mean, there are components to popular athletes where there's a marketplace, but it may not be the revenue sports that everybody thinks it is. And yet there's sort of a rush to get, obviously, the best athlete in. So you got to create this marketplace. And this, in your view, would help what seems like, from a fan's perspective, a divide of haves and have-nots. Who's willing to push the edge of the envelope, try to get the best basketball or football team on the field?
Yeah.
Feel right?
But
go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, you're right, but it's all comers, and that's the structure that we're trying to create, that you don't have to be in the Power Four conference to step forward and say you want to participate in revenue share with student athletes.
Right.
And that's what our hope is. Our hope is that this thing trickles down throughout Division I, not just at the top conferences. Those are campus by campus decisions. Mm-hmm. So the mandate isn't you have to, it is an opt-in kind of program.
Yeah.
Yeah, and look, and student athletes are still going to choose to go. There's a transactional piece of this. You can't, you can't understate that. But at the same time, for some of the elite players, where they play, the history of that institution, putting athletes into professional ranks.
Mm-hmm.
Certain position groups do better at certain places.
Yeah, before nil.
Right.
That's
That's the history of college
yeah.
athletics. Like we all understand that. Each of our leagues has brands that that sort of step out and have more history and and a longer legacy of competitive success that exists. Kids still care about that. Fans still care about that. The transaction system, influences it. But I still think that kids are going to make decisions like. Look, it should matter who your coach is and who you relate to, who your position coach is, who comes into your home to speak with you and your family, and those things matter also.
And maybe where you get your degree from.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's the part about it with with all the transferring. Kids obviously have the right to move, and no one's suggesting that that's the wrong thing at all. But creating a system with more rationality may give kids a chance to pause a little bit, go a little bit deeper in building relationship. Maybe when one coach leaves, they'll wait a little longer when the next coach gets there to see if they can build a relationship before they decide to do something different. And
So
that could be more healthy to the educational piece.
Yeah. So have you thought about any changes to that, transfer portal process? Maybe some sort of, cap on the number of transfers a school could take in a given year? Just because, like, what I worry about as a fan is, and talking to coaches and stuff, is what's great about the sport and what's so thrilling about being involved in it is the development of the player and building that relationship and seeing them start, as a freshman who needs a lot of support and seeing them become a great athlete, And I worry in the transfer portal era, do you lose some of that?
With nil.
With nil.
I mean, you're presiding over a very difficult time in college athletics.
I don't think how many is going to be something that regularly. I think that gets to be really complicated telling certain students.
But it would put the emphasis back on the schools to say, if I'm going to bring somebody on, they're going to get on the field.
I think we're
because they
more
only have a
focused,
limit.
to be really clear, and you guys can jump in, but I think we're more focused on when. I think what you've seen just recently in basketball, you saw it in football, like Ohio State going deep into the CFP, playing all those games while the transfer portal is open, while kids who are on a team that's trying to compete for the national championship are making decisions like, what's going to happen to me if I stay? If I don't get in the portal right away, am I going to lose a spot to somebody else? So I got to get in. Like, Penn State's backup quarterback had a really tough decision. He was a Pennsylvania kid. He wanted to stay, and he was trying to figure out, could he start? He knew that the quarterback was going to come back, and so he's trying to figure out, what am I doing next year? That's a tremendous amount of pressure on a young person to walk away from something he was a part of. And he wasn't just a backup that wasn't playing. He was a meaningful player for them.
No, he scored a touchdown in the Big Ten championship.
So, this kind of pressure. So I think when we come together, and we've been talking about it more frequently, it's like the when. Like, there's no professional league that I'm aware of that has free agency in the middle of their postseason.
Right.
So that's what you want to call the portal. So I think a lot of this that's changing is all of the calendars have to be rethought. Like, what's the right year? We're also putting incredible burdens on our assistant coaches. They're coaching deep into seasons, then they're being asked to recruit. Like, their lifestyles are not easy. I know people think, well, this is a glamorous life and you're coaching, this is what they want to do. Yeah, a lot of them are obviously passionate about it, but we're putting a lot of burdens on them.
It's
in terms
365.
of trying to manage it. Yeah, it's not fair. It's not healthy.
Tony mentioned earlier, I think organically, it's going to slow down with settlement. I really do. And let's not forget that every time you go into the portal, you lose credits. So we're all in for, at the core, it's about the educational experience. But with a cap system in place and some of the other guardrails, if you will, that will help to define this new age of collegiate athletics, I do think it's going to slow down. And there'll be a more vested interest in staying at the institution you're at.
Let's inform the perspective around transfers. So part of the challenge in answering your question, first is we think about it every day, I think all of us, because you're just a phone call away from the next story, complaint, question about it. Second is there's been court activity that limits some of that ability. Certainly the frequency issue has been litigated at least once. When you transfer, there are some specific education impacts. So I sound like the get off my lawn guy right now, but let's talk about the reality. The time to graduation, based on research over years, extends. Your GPA, or the quality of that educational experience, declines across the spectrum. If you're a 4.0, the likelihood after transfer you're not a 4.0. The number of credits and your ability to enter a major and be eligible to play may be altered after the transfer. So pursuing that which you want may be very different to prepare you for the next stage in life. And the third is the likelihood of graduation declines. So length, quality, and likelihood. So should that be regulated by educational enterprises, our campuses and our conferences? Seemingly yes. Now let's define what that means. And part of that is the when. So when you think about the complexity of the problem, Tony's right. There's no pro league that has free agency during its championship. But most teams are not in the championship hunt. And so you take the basketball tournament with 350 plus Division I members, 68 make the tournaments for men's, women's basketball. That means there's roughly 300 teams that are dormant. Maybe they're in the NIT, maybe not, but it ends quite quickly. The backroom conversations, the secret phone calls, the third-party influences, we have to combat that as well. That's where some of this oversight. I'm not looking for the next big government project in this era of efficiency, right?
Some rules would be nice.
But the ability to set the rules, not be continually litigated for common sense realities. That's why I think informing what happens upon transfer is real. And that informs then what do you do about it, which would indicate, to my colleague's point, when the activity takes place to make it a healthy system and really a transparent system. The second would be to make sure that the frequency with which it can occur actually supports the kind of educational outcomes to which we're held responsible. Because here's a prediction. We're not that many years away from the stories, well, look at these graduation rates. These schools aren't committed to education. We are, but you need some structure to facilitate that education. Otherwise, the competitive pressures overwhelm without the governance that's appropriate.
So that kind of like leads to my question where looking at this, by establishing a national set of laws, it's like a win for students, it's a win for school, it's a win for conferences, for athletics, for fans. What is really the hindrance leading to this chaos that you currently have of like 34 different sets of rules? Is it just a lack of awareness among federal legislators of not knowing that this is something that needs to be done?
I'll jump in first, and my colleagues can add. First of all, everybody in college sports should raise their hand and say, we were slow to change. There was a system that was seen as working pretty well, not perfectly, but as we sit here on Capitol Hill, just pick the system that works perfectly, right? I mean, everything
You're not going to find a lot up here.
It's a human endeavor,
Yeah.
ripe for criticism. So the economics change, the expectations change, the pressures change, the willingness of state leaders to engage changed, and we'll use the NCAA, college athletics are slow to adapt. Okay, so there's the confessional. You just wallow in that, or you say, let's pursue something different. And so now we're trying to make what would have been in the NCAA time frame decades of change in a matter of months.
How much?
And our authority is limited by the different laws that have been enacted and by the litigation. So let's go back to, are there common sense elements that could be part of something that's introduced and pursued? I think we've done that. And what's the impediment? It's, there's some cynicism. You guys should do this yourselves. Well, that is becoming limited based on the external realities. There's a lot going on in the federal government, and respectfully, I absolutely agree. But this doesn't exist anyplace else, and the downstream implications on policy issues around the Olympics, those are real.
Well,
those are real.
Here's what, just picking up on this, here's what I find so fascinating, having been a collegiate, a consumer of all collegiate athletics. I love it all of us do. We've been huge fans for years. But growing up, it was all sort of an NCAA top-down regulation, right? All four of you guys, your resumes read like you could run, Fortune 50 companies, and you're headed conferences. And the way that I look at this now, it's so interesting that you all are the ones that are up here driving it at a conference level. Now, I understand that the revenue now and a huge part of college athletics is governed by you individually in your respective conferences and collectively on what you can agree on. It feels like the NCAA that we grew up with, that was always the sort of top-down, they're not as big of the piece of the solution. I don't want to put words in your mouth on this, and I know you certainly don't want to take shots at a governing body, but am I misreading that? I mean, it's interesting that the four of you are the ones that are leading this charge.
We're not adversarial at all. I think we're respectful of change, and that's hard at a national level. So when I referenced earlier, there are 360 plus Division I members. 360 colleges and universities. Our 4 conferences represent the high, consistently competitive end. There are economics associated with that, there are expectations, there are pressures, there are support realities, right? That's very different than many of the others who are in it for enrollment management purposes or the branding of being Division I within their state legislature that provides some conversation and opportunities. And so trying to make decisions in big rooms filled with people doesn't work very well. And that's part of the change. On the other hand, what the NCAA does, like I've never seen any of those 360 schools, even if they're frustrated about eligibility issues or infractions issues, they never decline an invitation to participate in an NCAA championship.
I've yet to see that.
I've not seen that. And when the trophies are handed out and it's got the NCAA logo on it, they're holding it up. I just witnessed that myself.
One shining moment. It's pretty catchy too.
Yeah, and so that's part of the difficulty of can we keep the big tent with a T on the end of that. It's not the Big Ten, the big tent together.
It's going to be the Big 50 soon.
Tony, you're coast to coast, man.
Well, people opine about that. Yeah, I'm just humble me in 2 time zones, all contiguous states. These other guys are all.
You got New York and LA.
But can we make it? Can we make it work? But I think we have a different leadership responsibility than maybe 15 or 20
That's
years
interesting.
ago.
Josh, I think moving forward, you're going to see more of a hybrid. I think you're going to see us take a little bit more active position in rulemaking and enforcement, specifically around settlement.
Yeah.
Jim, I would just say, I think your question is a really good one because optics are important. And listen, the NCAA hasn't made all the right decisions, but we're part of the NCAA, and we've been responsible for a lot in some of those decisions that haven't really gone well. I mean, they try to serve the membership. I will say this with President Baker, he's done a really good job of staying connected with us, and we meet with him regularly. And in the end, I just think for the 4 of us, because of the brands that we have, the schools, the market, that we have a responsibility to the greater good of college sports to create something that has a sustainable future in it, not just for the biggest brands, but for the entire enterprise.
Is it impossible to imagine more conference consolidation? I mean, you 4 are here getting along very well.
They're probably working on it before they came in here.
A lot of.
Well, my next question is going to make them fight. So.
Yeah, well, that's why we want to wrap it up. Is make them fight.
A lot of rumors about Big East, ACC. A couple coaches out there really want those 2 to combine. You know, I mean, all 4 of you guys work very well together.
Want to break some news, Jim?
Is it impossible?
Not today, guys.
James, all I know is you enjoy being part of the Big 12 now, don't you?
Well, listen, Arizona
we talked
State,
about that a little bit earlier.
Brett, we did, and I understand that we've come to an understanding about targeting calls in college football playoffs.
We did.
There's a difference between targeting and almost targeting.
Okay.
And those may be small distinctions. But they are real.
That was our crew.
Tony's got to fess up on that.
But since you mentioned the playoff.
Let me just finish my question. Is it impossible to imagine additional consolidation in college conferences?
I've sent a memo to my president saying I hope everyone stays where they are.
Yeah.
Now that may be easy for me. We have a pretty unique circumstance now with our 16. And I was in a meeting last week where the issue came up from a smaller campus leader, smaller conference campus leader. And I said, look, I'm supposed to be the one losing sleep over this, and I lose none. You're losing all of it. There are just realities, there are economic realities, there are practical realities about just expanding in numbers. There are traditions, and when we talked about more, one of our chancellors said, we know who we are, our fans know who we are, and why would we just make a leap? Now that's us. Others may have different views, but it's not something that occupies the majority of my time. What we're doing with transfers, I told you, is every day.
Yeah.
What we deal around legal settlement, how we interact with states and how we interact with Congress, those occupy a lot more of my thinking and time than does some next level expansion.
I would just echo Greg's sentiments. I mean, from a Big 12 perspective, we love the composition and makeup. Obviously, we went through realignment. We've got 8 new members over the last 2 years. We love the direction of where we're going as a conference. And to Greg's point again, we're focused on some of the bigger issues around collegiate athletics and making sure that we can all prosper together moving forward.
Tony, same?
Yeah, I would say the same. Yeah, I think this past year, we had integration of the 4 new members for the first time and scheduling and all the challenges. And you go 28 sports deeps like we do. But this last year it's been settlement operations. It's been trying to get this settlement right, to get ready for the hearing that we had the other day, to build rules. We're taking on a whole new ecosystem, like in terms of like actually how we're going to operate together, like rulemaking. Everything is going on. It's completely changing. So that's been a big piece of what the last year has been, getting that right. While we've had inside our conference, making sure that the 4 new members get to the place they need to be, and then we do those things right. And and scheduling, from the way we think about it, is just sort of a living thing. You've got to look at how you schedule and get feedback from coaches and players. And we'll get together in May as a conference. I'm sure I'll get a lot of feedback.
Yeah, I'm sure
about how we scheduled and what we got right and what we need to do better. That's just and that's just part of what it is. But we're really focused on what we have right now and this next world and operating this next world for the institutions as best we can.
Well, you gentlemen are very impressive. Really appreciate the time that you've given us here today. You got a big road. I mean, it's tough to sell these guys on anything, right? Apple pie probably only gets like 51. Yeah. I'm not sure that, this is a tough deal. It's an important one. We wanted to allow you to provide the context of why this is important from a fan perspective and the games that we all enjoy watching. So thank you for taking the time with us.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Appreciate it.
I just thought that was so interesting, and it's very clear that college athletics is standing at the edge of a cliff, and beneath them is total chaos, and the only way to get to the other side is for Congress to build a bridge. It looks like national standards, and these guys are clearly devoted to trying to get some sort of national standard. I really hope Congress can figure it out.
It's interesting because, the first time that this was presented to me, I was like, what the hell does the federal government have to do with collegiate athletics? And I was like, why don't you clean up the mess yourself? Right? You created a situation where you were basically like railroading famous and very talented athletes into just paying the school for their own name, image, and likeness with no compensation whatsoever. That created a system where it all went, haywire. But ultimately, when they all came back together, it was like the worst form of a booster system.
Right.
Where it's like all this behind the scenes sort of nonsense. But now that you hear more about it and you realize that like state legislatures are changing law, like tax laws, to deal with trying to incentivize certain schools in certain states over their competition in the same conference in another school in another state, you kind of got to get involved at some level. It has the capacity of ruining collegiate athletics. So I don't know if like exactly their deal is exactly what needs to happen, but I totally agree that something needs to happen because this is, it's a big money deal. We just watched March Madness.
Yeah.
Right.
That's a hard to ignore thing. The college football playoff, hard to ignore.
Right.
Big business.
Right.
Kind of feels like any other big business that government would have an eye on, but it doesn't seem like it in this case.
I hope they can figure it out.
All right, we got one more interview with you. This is really, really good. Caitlyn Sutherland, you've heard her here a number of times talking about corruption, and in particular foreign money and how it's made its way into progressive leftist politics, influencing campaigns, ballot initiatives, the larger ecosystem, something we've had an eye on forever, and I know a lot of you have too. So listen to this. Well, you've heard her here before on Ruthless, and she's sort of our go-to on exposing public corruption all over the country. And they've got a bunch of new stuff going on. Caitlyn Sutherland, Americans for Public Trust. How are you?
Good, thank you. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, you got it. Sounds like you got a bunch of breaking stuff that you're working on. Our previous conversations focused a lot on foreign money, working its way through the nonprofit world, having a material impact on elections, changing election law, all this sort of dark underworld of the left and how they've been sort of funding this network. But you've taken it out in the States now.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So, Americans for Public Trust, we've always been working at, uncovering how much politics is influencing our public policy. And what we have discovered that it's, foreign dark money that is influencing our elections and our politics. And that's what we've been working on, is how to stop the foreign funding of elections once and for all, and especially how to stop the foreign funding of ballot issues.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Which is shocking at some level that we have to have this conversation, but it's something that's been pervasive. And I remember, one of the last times you were here, you had like this big web, this big map of all the various places where foreign funding has gone and how it's sort of impacted elections in many ways. And from a federal government standpoint, like, I think people have gotten their arms wrapped around that. You've done a lot of good work to get Congress's attention on a bunch of it. But it's not just happening there. It's in the states and everywhere else.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So, just, quick, to back up just a little bit, the foreign nationals cannot influence our elections.
Right.
That's simple. That's been law for about
Pretty
40 years.
black letter.
Pretty basic.
Yeah.
It's one of the basic, tenets of our law that foreign nationals can't influence our elections, right? Most, Americans also agree with that. So it's one thing that we can all agree on, that foreign nationals should not be influencing our elections. But the key in that is, what does the word elections mean? Well, it's really pretty limited. It's candidate elections, meaning that foreign nationals can't
It's like
fund
campaigns.
They can't fund candidates. They can't fund committees. They can't fund super PACs. Well, gee, we all have worked in campaigns. There's so much that matters up to and including on election day that doesn't really fit in one of those nice little campaign buckets. So what we've had and what we've seen, through my crazy webs that you've seen, is that foreign money is coming in and influencing all these different vehicles that are election related, but not elections. So one of those being ballot issues, right? So that is what we have been working on, the state and federal level, is to close that loophole. It's pretty simple. If you're a foreign national, you can't influence elections. Don't you think you shouldn't be able to influence ballot issues either?
Yeah.
Luckily, states have caught on. There's been huge momentum across the country. And as of today, 4 states just this year have passed a ban on the foreign funding of ballot issues.
Yeah, and I know you've been in these states over the last couple of months. I know you had success in my home state of Ohio last November. Can you tell us a little bit about how that fight is going on the state level?
Yeah, so Ohio was an amazing state to work with. They saw that their ballot issues were being corrupted by foreign money. Over $20 million in foreign-backed funds.
Yeah, that's wild.
Yep, made its way into Ohio. But legislative leaders in Ohio, they fought back. They said no more. They stepped up and they passed one of the strongest and most comprehensive bans on the direct and indirect foreign funding of ballot issues. And many states across the country, including Kansas, Wyoming, Kentucky, and Indiana, have followed suit this year and passed their own ban.
I mean, it only makes sense if you think about it. The funny thing, in the states where there are really active ballot initiatives, I mean, it's one thing to ban, as we all agree, ban foreign money in direct campaigns for elected officials, but they also have to adhere to the laws of the ballot initiatives that are ultimately on the ballot that don't have the same conformity. I mean, I imagine when you drop into some of these state houses and have this conversation, people are sort of dumbfounded by how much has actually occurred already.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's take, for instance, Ohio, and let's just, explain what is a ballot issue. Folks may not even know that, I go in and I vote for or against it on election day. Why wouldn't it be covered in the ban for foreign nationals can influence our election? So it's a huge loophole. But these ballot issues, while, an important part of direct democracy, oftentimes, if you're at the grocery store, if you're in the Midwest, you're at Meijer, you're at Publix, you're in Florida, and someone says, would you like to sign this petition to get this, public policy on the ballot? But most of the times, it is the most far left extremist version of public policy, because let's take Ohio, they're not going to vote for, to pass some of these laws. So what they're doing is they're sidestepping the legislative process and they're picking the most far left radical policies. And we've been able to trace all the different states that this foreign funding has come in, and it is some extreme versions. We're talking about, abortion, no limits, codify it,
right.
Radical changes to election policy, forced gerrymandering, like what they wanted in Ohio, Oregon, let's just decriminalize basically every single drug.
Right.
That's so Oregon, right?
Yeah.
So, but also at the same time, what they're doing is they're targeting states with these concurrent contested elections. So take, for instance, John Tester was on the ballot last November, and they said, well, if we put abortion on the ballot with John Tester.
They're trying to codify the left.
Yeah, and
basically.
they try to, get them across the finish line. So it's a very targeted, very cohesive weaponization of these ballot issues on the left. And they're using foreign money to do it.
It also appears pretty strategic from these other foreign power players. And we always like to talk about our border problem in the context of people flowing in across the Rio Grande. But the border problem extends to money flowing in from countries that actually do not like us very much. We talked about elections, and you're working on the elections thing. I know you guys also put out a big study about the billions and billions of dollars that are flowing into our universities, schools like MIT, Carnegie Mellon, Stanford. These are schools that are producing the top engineers of the next generation in our country, people who are going to work on sensitive, like public works projects. And not for nothing, they also have big contracts from DOD and from the government. And so that is a problem to me, it seems like a huge, huge problem that foreign countries are influencing our universities. And I don't think it's a coincidence that our universities have gone off to the left side at the same time as this money's flowing in.
Yeah, absolutely. So, another area where we've been, tracing all the money, when it comes to ballot issues, we've been able to trace, that a foreign national has given, Hans-Jörg Wyss, I know we love to talk about him here, has given $280 million to the 1630 fund, and they've turned around and spent $130 million in 25 states. So much money. Now,
Crazy.
Ready for some more scarier numbers? What's going on with our colleges and universities? We were able to trace that $60 billion with a B, dollars has come from foreign sources into our colleges and universities. And yeah, as you said, it's coming to these top research institutions, the Ivy Leagues, Harvard, MIT, Columbia, and you think, well, what's going on at all these universities? Well, they're losing their federal funding because, they're breeding grounds, for, these anti-Semitic rallies. They are harboring hate around campus. And by the way, they are, the top recipients of this foreign money, a lot of it from adversarial countries. China, Qatar, you name it. They're flowing into the universities.
It also explains a lot of the animosity that some of these colleges and universities have towards just sort of basic American values, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's been so many times over the last 6 months where I've looked at whether it's how they've handled the Hamas protests or just, kind of basic American value type stuff where they've come down either wishy-washy or on the other side of it, and you're like, how the hell did they land in that spot? Well, I don't know. If you do a little accounting according to your work, turns out that they have a pretty significant incentive to see it maybe not our way.
Oh, yeah. So, this foreign money, we all know that foreign money is buying influence, and this foreign money is buying influence on these college campuses. And we can see a direct correlation between the universities that are getting this foreign money and what it's influencing, particularly money coming from the Chinese, right? That foreign money can buy access to research and can buy access, just for influence over student bodies, have them sway, be a little bit more sympathetic to Hamas rather the United States. So when you lay it out and you start tracking it, it's a huge problem. The good news is that because all this foreign money is coming in through all these various ways, be it elections and ballot issues and colleges and universities, Congress actually stepped up a few weeks ago, and they actually, in the House, passed legislation that would, fix some of the foreign money coming into colleges and universities. So while it is, very problematic, when you hear these numbers and you see what this foreign money is doing, it's good to know that legislative leaders are working on reforms to stop it once and for all.
Well, and that's part of the thing that you guys do better than anybody is one, flagging and making people aware of something that, frankly, most people wouldn't be. Unless you got the maps out and did the string thing with the beautiful
it's like
mind.
78 tabs right now, I think, open on my computer. So, yeah.
But you're also providing some idea of how you fix this sort of thing. And I think really sort of consensus ideas that should have wide bipartisan support.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not so much talk about an issue, right? It's very important to do public education and, issue advocacy and awareness. But, where we really started to see, a change in the momentum is when you can actually have a solution.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not so much as, foreign money is bad. You should probably stop the foreign money. It's just like, well, how do I do that?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why we've been, testifying in state houses across the country, as well in Congress, to work with very common sense, meaningful reforms that close all these loopholes that allow foreign money into our institutions.
And all this money ultimately employs a cottage industry of the progressive left, right? I mean, it's one thing to have an agenda and try to execute it in incredibly nefarious ways, which we have seen and we've just talked about. But they also just have like a standing set of organizations across the country that just continue day after day at trying to have this progressive left agenda that basically nobody would agree with.
Yeah.
Yet they do.
Oh, yeah. And think at the same time, the left is the one railing against outside money, the so-called dark money. She's like, hello, you've got foreign money backing your little prop-up groups all around town to the tunes of hundreds of millions of dollars, yet nobody wants to talk about it.
Right.
And that is what is really, really alarming, is the silence. And I'm talking about you, Sheldon Whitehouse. Like no one is talking about how the left is propped up by this foreign money.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody always likes to complain about the right's dark money, but I like to channel one of my former colleagues who Chris Winkleman once told me that if you talk about dark money on the right, you must talk about dark money on the left. And it's not only the left's dark money, it's foreign dark money, which can be regulated, and the states are taking action, and they're absolutely rejecting the notion of foreign interference in their states.
It's such good work. It's such important work. So what's next? You just keep working through the states, ensuring that there's transparency, that everybody knows the problem, trying to pass legislation where it's capable.
Yeah, we're passing, hopefully, Arkansas this week should be heading to the governor's desk to sign their own ban on the foreign funding. We're actively working, with Missouri, Montana, Texas, Louisiana, Alabama, and Tennessee, probably forgetting a lot of states. There's been so much momentum that these states are taking in their own hands to close this foreign influence loophole once and for all. And we're also very excited that Congress should act as well.
That's great. You got to feel pretty good about this.
Yeah, it's great seeing legislative change. And let me tell you guys, the states move fast.
Yeah.
It is so much. It has been a sprint, these legislative sessions, because they only have weeks at a time. So while we're very hopeful that Congress will close these various foreign influence loopholes as well, it has been great to partner with the states to see the legislative action very quickly. I mean, 4 as of this year is really, really unheard of.
Yeah.
So they've been great partners on the states. It's a winning issue, and, just Donald Trump, even a couple weeks ago, in his executive order, said to prioritize this, that in his executive order said, we should reject the notion that we should influence, that foreign nationals should be influencing our elections, and even mentioned this issue of ballot measures.
It's the old belt and suspenders approach, which you guys do better than anybody. Americans for Public Trust. Where can people find out more?
We can check out our website at americansforpublictrust.org. We're on X at apublictrust.
That's awesome. Caitlyn Sutherland, thank you so much for coming back in. Welcome anytime. Anytime you get new developments, come on back. Let us all know. We've been following this for a long time. Very important to the program.
Great. Well, thank you, guys.
She is a real tactician, and obviously she's been crisscrossing the country, hitting all these states at the beginning of the year. It sounds like she's got a full plan to keep doing that, and it's a subject that's near and dear to Smug's heart.
Yeah,
foreign money.
It's a huge deal, and you love to see it's gotten on the radar of a lot of folks. Elon's on the case. It's important that everyone becomes aware of what a problem this is becoming.
Yeah, totally. So, listen, our question of the day was, does the media bear any responsibility for some of it seems like an influx in political violence here? Give us your honest answers. Be very interested. If you like and subscribe, we'll read all of them. And, we'll select a few for Thursday. Here's to Hope and the old man. Wishing him well on his assignment this week. I know he's notably absent here. but we're thinking of him.
Always
We
do.
miss our friend.
He'll be back soon.
He'll be back soon. He'll be back at a minimum next Tuesday. Might be out Thursday, but such is life in the business.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I think we did it, fellas.
I think so. Absolute banger of an episode. Gentlemen, thank you so much to the commissioners for that wonderful discussion. Thank you so much, Caitlyn Sutherland, for also enlightening our audience. So, until next time, minions, keep the faith, hold the line, and own the libs. We'll see you Thursday. Stay ruthless.